Welcome back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol. We're delighted to bring it to you from here at the Diggy Palace front lawn live. It's our pleasure to present today Oonga by Devashish Makhija in conversation with Kaveree Bamzai and introduced by Nandita Das. Director and writer Devashish Makhija's latest book Oonga is a powerful novel based on his film of the same name, capturing the inherent paradox between dystopian development and utopian ideologies. The book narrates the journey of a little boy in the midst of a clash between Adivasis, Naxalites, the CRPF, and a mining company. Makhija's other books include When Ali Became Bajrangbali and Forgetting and Occupying Silence. He is also the director of the feature film Ajji and Bhonsle and the short film Taandav. Among others, in conversation with Kaveree Bamzai, Makhija dives into this evocative tale of identity and the tragedy of victims of violence forced into battles they don't wish to fight. The book is being launched here at the Jaipur Literature Festival 2021. Nandita Das has acted in more than 40 feature films in 10 different languages. Manto, Nandita's second directorial film, premiered in 2018 at the Cannes Film Festival. Her first book, Manto and I, chronicles her 6-year-long journey of making the film. Nandita, we're delighted to have you here to make an introductory comment on Oonga, a film that you acted in. Nandita Das, over to you.
Oonga is a film that I did almost 9 years ago. When Dev came to me, it was his first film, but I could see he was very passionate about the story. And it's a story that is really exploring the difficulties that Adivasis feel, especially this is set in Odisha, a state that I come from, because they are caught between the Maoist, Naxal movements and outfits that are really fighting for their rights but are or can also get violent, and at the same time those who are trying to mainstream them in the name of development. And how the common Adivasis just get completely caught between fighting for their rights and really not knowing how they should be dealing with their lives. And it's a very complex issue, and seldom do we see such complexities being told simply and powerfully. In fact, increasingly such films that are really representing stories of the people at large are just vanishing from our collective consciousness. So it was definitely a film that I felt I wanted to be part of. Himla's character was also really nice. It was very interesting because she's kind of a conduit. She's neither part of the Naxalite movement, nor is she part of obviously the government or the mining corporation and all those people who are trying to mainstream them. She's really wanting to educate the children. She feels that's where the power is, and she's ideologically she's very strong, and it was lovely to be in Odisha and to be playing a character there. So yes, I mean, it was a film that was close to my heart, and I was really disappointed that it didn't get released properly. Many independent films unfortunately bear with that fate. So I'm so happy that Dev had decided to give it another form, because the story had to be told. And it's really wonderful that now it's in a book and we can all read it. And I think a story has its soul, and it must continue, whether it's through a film, through a book, and maybe they'll feed into each other. Maybe once you read the book, you'd want to see the film, and those who've seen the film would want to read the book. So I just want to wish Dev and the publishers and everyone who's been involved with the project good luck. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be at Diggy Palace, quite a favorite place to come to JLF. But here is wishing the book and the people who have been with that journey for this long. It takes 12 years is not a short journey. So I'm so glad, Dave, that you stuck with it and that you are bringing this story to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandita Das, for setting in context Oonga, the book, Oonga, the film. Absolutely brilliant. And thank you very much for taking the time out to do this. Devashish Makhija has researched and assisted on the movies Black Friday and Bunty or Bubbly. He's written numerous screenplays, notably Anurag Kashyap's yet-to-be-made superhero saga Doga. He's also written and directed the multiple award-winning short films Taandav, Elaichi, Ugly Bar, and the critically acclaimed full-length feature film Ajji and Bhonsle. Oonga, a feature film he wrote and directed in 2013, never released in Indian theatres despite a critically acclaimed film festival run, so he reverse adapted it into a gripping novel of the same name. Kaveree Bamzai is a journalist and author. She was the first woman editor of India Today's magazine and is the author of No Regrets, the guilt-free women's guide to a good life. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, Oonga by Devashish Makhija in conversation with Kaveree Bamzai. Devashish, Kaveree, over to you.
Devashish, it's such a pleasure to see you, and it's been an absolute joy to read the book. I've spent the last 2 days doing that, and it truly is gripping. It's very powerful. I want to start with a line that you have there. We who take from the earth and give back will be replaced by those who take and never give back. This really is who we are right now. And I think the pandemic has taught us more than ever that this cannot go on. How amazing is it that a movie that you made, well, quite a few years ago, 2013, when it was released, is still so relevant? How amazing is that, and how much more relevant is it? So talk a little about that journey, about making that movie, making this book, and at this moment in time.
The sad thing is I don't think it's amazing as much as it's hugely tragic that we.
Devashish?
Yes? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I can.
I'm saying
Yes, yes,
it's hugely
we
tragic
can hear
that
you. Yeah.
we just never learn from our mistakes. And I had traveled the areas, the Adivasi areas of Chhattisgarh and South Orissa about 11 years ago. And for about 5 or 6 years before that, I was curious and dissatisfied with the narrative that I was reading in the mainstream media about what the Naxalites wanted, how they were being called the greatest internal security threat in this country by the Manmohan Singh government, and I felt that I wasn't getting the complete picture. So when I traveled those areas and the things that I saw, they sort of they reeked of what the British had done to Indians all those years, and now we were doing to our own countrymen. So somewhere, that wheel was turning over and over again. We were not learning from our mistakes. So what was relevant 100 years ago was relevant 10 years ago, and what was relevant 10 years ago continues to be relevant today. So I don't know if it's going to change, and that's the biggest heartbreak here. So all the things that I wrote into Oonga in 2012 when I wrote the script.
And in fact,
Yes. Kaveree, you were saying.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Now, I'm saying the things I wrote in 2012 when I
No,
started.
I was just saying that in fact you also call it
8 years hence, when I was, we were doing the final edits of the book, Tulika and I was rereading material, rereading my research. I had several exercise books where I had made notes as I was traveling through those areas. Nothing had changed. Not one shred of research material or statistic or things that broke my heart in 2010. Nothing had changed. So somewhere a book like this sadly will probably be relevant till we die. I don't know what our next generation will see, but so the pandemic also hasn't changed anything. We are back to being monsters. I thought we would re-evaluate our decisions, but no, we're not.
Absolutely. And in fact, Devashish, you in fact also call it company. And company could be, the company that you mentioned in the book. It could be the East India Company. Really, nothing changes. That's really, as you said, quite tragic. The other point about it is this relationship between the Adivasis and their land. And, we see it again and again in all the protests that we see, the farmers' protests as well. Their relationship with land is so deep, and in fact the land, as you say in your book, also reacts to their moods. The trees cry, the earth cries. Talk a little about that relationship. It's so deep and so wounding almost.
Yeah. No, in fact, it's not just the Adivasi. If any of us say that the Adivasi has this deep connection with nature, and we shouldn't deprive them of that connection with nature, I think it will smack of an oversimplification. It will smack of talking about them as the other. I think we all have that connection. It's just that with urban life, the kind of lives that we live, we're getting increasingly disconnected. So for me, talking about these things using the Adivasi as a medium was trying to tell urban youngsters, because it's a young adult fiction. It's for 16, the age group 16 plus, and I'm hoping kids just out of school or in the
Yeah.
last 2 years at school will read this and wonder if they lost something by being born into these urban, consumeristic, technologically, dependent lifestyles. So it's all of us. It's all of us who can, pick cues from nature, live in harmony with nature, and gain a lot. But we've lost that ability. So the Adivasi is a reminder that we have that ability, and if we don't live that codependent life, we are going to self-destruct faster and faster.
The other remarkable thing, Devashish, about the book is the women, and I think that is the key here. The women are the ones who are holding uh, this community. They're holding really half the world. They're holding the whole world aloft, I think, on their shoulders. Whether it's Himla or Oonga's mother, they really are the spine, the backbone of the community.
Yeah. No, women as characters, again, I might smack of oversimplification here, but being a man, when I made this film Ajji about 5 years ago, it was me trying to understand what is the
Yeah.
female energy and what is my relationship as a man being born into a world that is so increasingly patriarchal. Even the Me Too movement really didn't find success because we are so deep-rootedly patriarchal. We need something stronger than that. So from Ajji onwards, I've been questioning my role in the scheme of things, and how can I raise questions that can hopefully someday, 10 years, 100 years later, lead to an answer. So the women that you speak of in Oonga, they were there in the film as well, but I think I was not equipped to explore them to a certain depth like I could in the novel. So for me, Lakshmi, the Naxalite leader, Hemla and Ungama are really the beating heart of the story. Unga is literally just the face. He's not the beating heart of the story. So for me, it was important to explore those themes that I have now, been exploring in the last 4 or 5 years, and they were not in the film when we made that all those years back.
Right. Devashish, the other thing is it's Odisha, but it could be anywhere. It could be Kashmir. It could be the Northeast. That is the tragedy of India. It
Yeah.
could be in any part of the country, and it would be the same issue. And I really admire the way you've been able to capture the CRPF sort of mindset. It's a very peculiar mindset, and we often don't see them as victims. And here you've been very non-judgmental, and you've shown they've suffered too. you know and you have Pradeep's character who realizes that the only way to have power is to be in uniform. His
Mm.
father ends up in uniform, guarding the very land that he sold. I mean, it's all such a terrible vicious cycle, but they are as well victims.
When we are talking about, like you said, the faceless company, it could be the East India Company, it could be a private company, it could be a public sector
Yes.
undertaking. It was irrelevant to me what the company was. What was relevant to me was the thought process behind something as hegemonous and huge as a company that will only see profit. And when something that huge, when you collectively are up against something that huge, everybody ends up being a victim. Sometimes, even if you don't realize you're a victim, like a Manoranjan, who's the CRPF commander, he doesn't realize he's a victim of a larger thought process, of a larger machine that is only using him for a certain end goal. And when you're collectively up against that, what can you be but a victim? Because you can't use your mind and your consciousness to take decisions against that larger, vicious wheel. So for me, it was important to see that the CRPF are not in control. The Naxalites, they are reacting. They might have sometimes very valid agenda, but they are not in control either. Everybody's merely reacting. And somewhere the atmosphere that we're living in today in this country, anyone who wants to question anything that the establishment does, we are all just reacting, and that's exhausting. I wish we could act upon something sometime, because we spend all our lives reacting and we have no energy left to really act upon, our true impulses. So somewhere that helplessness that I was feeling, I wanted to explore through this idea of everyone being a victim, a helpless victim, that too.
Also, absolutely. And I think the other point, this every protest that we see, every form of dissent that we see, you see echoes of it in your book. Uh, the idea of asking for papers, the idea of asking for identity. I mean, what was the whole agitation about CA, but that. So again, you have that whole question being explored here. It's quite it's quite contemporary in that sense. Talk a little about that sense of identity as well, the Adivasi sense of identity versus this sort of company which could be anything. How does it play out?
If you look at the farmer protests today, it is when I speak to my peers, my contemporaries in the city, everyone looks at the farmers of India as one big mass, a faceless mass. And when they talk about what they're up against, the government
Yeah,
policies,
yeah,
which is pro corporate, you have an Adani or an Ambani which has a face. They are not faceless. So somewhere those who don't understand what the farmers are protesting for, and if they don't try to understand how that's important to the rest of us, they will always see that protest as faceless, and they will always see what they're protesting against as having a face. And that makes it easier for them to relate to, the system, because the system always comes with some sort of a face, if it's the government or a corporate. So here also in my story, I was trying to flip it. I was trying to make the company faceless. I was trying to give a sense of identity to those who are paying that price. Whether it was the CRPF or the Adivasi, it could be the farmer today in India, or it could be the Dalit. It could be, for lack of a better metaphor here, I myself feel rather displaced because I'm a Sindhi. My parents, both of them, came from Pakistan, which is now Pakistan, during the partition. I was born and I grew up in Calcutta, where I wasn't a Bengali, but I was around Bengali culture a lot. And now I've been working in Bombay for 18 years, where I'm not Marathi, but I'm around Marathi culture a lot. My two films are Ajji and Bhonsle. If you don't know better, they sound like Marathi films.
right.
So I struggle with identity. I don't know where my roots are.
Yeah,
So when I am trying to question the system as to my place in the scheme of things, I don't know where to begin, because I have nothing to prove that I have an identity that allows me to question the system. So if I multiply my helplessness by 5,000, I get the helplessness of an Adivasi or a Dalit or a farmer. And for me, that breaks my
yeah,
heart. So I needed to give them faces, explore their
absolutely.
identity.
The other interesting thing, Devashish, is the importance of the eye. You see it everywhere in the novel. Everyone has to keep an eye out, ahead, behind. There's a symbol of the eye which represents the company. I found that again a very, very powerful metaphor. Talk about that.
Again, you're beautifully caught, because somewhere I was trying to simplify and sort of allegorize the idea of surveillance. And today, with modern technology, the system can
Yes.
surveil you a lot more. But it's always been the case. Even when we had landline phones, if the government wanted, they could tap your line. This goes back to my research for Black Friday. I spent 6 months
Right.
researching material that Hussein Zaidi had already put in the book.
Right.
But when you try to give faces for cinema, you need to research the people a little more deeply. So around that time, I spoke to, I can't name these people, but I spoke to the CBI, I spoke to people in the IB, I spoke to police, the crime branch, and there were there were thousands of hours of phone recordings that they had of people that I can't name, but they're like all their phones were tapped, and they were just surveilling all the time. And I asked them that, you've got all this material, what do you want to do with it? They're like, if we leak all of this, we will not be able to hold on to a government for more than 5 minutes. So they sit on all this material. So I knew that back till the 1960s, we could tap anything, anywhere at will. Today, it's just become easier. So how do you then live a life of liberty, equality, fraternity, all the things that the Constitution enshrines? How do you live that life? If you are being watched all the time, if you are supposed to toe the line, supposed to walk the talk that the system wants you to, how do you manifest those ideas in the Constitution? So that idea of the I, for me, was to create that sense of dread, that you're being watched and you don't have freedom, even though you think that you do. It's a delusion.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I found in Hemla's character so much purity, so much courage, and so much fearlessness. And I think that is the fearlessness that we have lost as a society. We're also afraid, aren't we? I think that's the biggest, that's the biggest threat to us. It's not what the state is doing to us. It's not what the environment is doing to us. It's our own fear. And I think Hemla strikes us as being such a hero to me. She's such a hero to me because she has so much courage.
One of my biggest inspirations for Himla was Soni Sodi. And when I sort of knew more about Soni Sodi, heard
Yeah.
her talk, watched her at work, I realized that. So there's a line I use often, that you can't, I mean, a woman without hope is a woman without fear. So when you take away hope, and I saw Soni Sodi must have, if you look into her eyes, I see an absence of hope. But that doesn't mean that that manifests as utter, hopelessness. The absence of hope is not hopelessness. But that absence of hope, because she's seen so much taken away, brings her a certain courage,
Right.
because she has nothing left to lose. What do you take away from her anymore? So somewhere for Hemla, I wanted to manifest that she might have seen so much that we are not privy to, that she cannot fear anymore. What is the worst that can happen? That she will be physically assaulted, that someone will chop her hands off. She has seen that too. She's seen that happen. And something a friend of mine said to me during those journeys of
Absolutely.
mine
Someone will give.
through the Adivasi areas, he said that we have to lose our fear of being thrown in jail. Most of the time people don't act upon a certain thing that they want to question the government about, because they're afraid that they'll get thrown in jail. He said, you obliterate that fear. Forget that you will die in jail. You will get food. You will be able to take a piss when you want. You will be able to take a dump once a day. You'll be able to sleep. Maybe the mosquitoes will bother you, but you will not die in jail. So if you take away that fear, it takes away your fear to question the system, because the system has only one way to bring you down: disciplining you by throwing you in jail, by threatening you with a warrant. So I want to talk about those things through Himla.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you do that really well. The other point I think comes through so powerfully is it's not a question of, and I think we saw it during this huge exodus during the pandemic, when people went home and they were walking the streets with all their belongings on them. That it's not just about poverty, it's about dignity. At the end of the day, people want dignity. They want respect. And if you don't give it to them, they, you know, at some point they will break.
Dignity is everything, and that's one of the saddest things when you go to an Adivasi village where maybe 5 or 6 men have been missing for years because they were thrown in a jail for merely asking for their rights. The first thing you see is that crushed soul, because amongst themselves there's a lot of dignity, but when they have to face the system, like we went to help one of the Praja lawyers there with a bunch of cases. So because we could read and write in English, so it was easier to read documents for them, and the documents come by the fucking kilogram. So they always need help to read documents and respond to them. So we went to the jail. We tried talking to the jailer. We tried talking to their lawyer. The first thing that jailer or that lawyer did was get up, look through us, and walk away. We felt insulted. Now imagine we were there for a month and a half. Now imagine having to put up with that every day, where you're not acknowledged, where nobody looks you in the eye, nobody talks to you. You just get up and walk away. That can make you think of doing very extreme things.
And yet you have Hemla trying her best to initiate dialogue, trying her best to teach the children Hindi so that they can grow up and speak to the company or the CRPF or whoever in their own language. So there is some amount of hope, but I mean, it gets crushed so easily. But yet that plea for dialogue is still a very powerful hope that you end with, even in your book. Although it is dystopian, there is still that hope. The plea for dialogue, the plea to listen to each other, the plea to understand each other. And let's talk a little about how that is so much in absence, not just in that community, but everywhere currently.
uh, that the dystopia that you speak of, I think, manifests in that one line where in the end Hemla is still, she's run back to the village, she's still trying to talk to Manoranjan, but suddenly she has this gun pointed in her face, and she suddenly realizes that I've been talking to the barrel of this gun
Yes,
all this time. I've not been talking to the people behind it, because this is what they'll thrust in my face when I'm actually pleading.
right.
So somewhere, that absence of communication, that everyone talking different languages. When I say different languages, I don't mean literally someone speaking Kuvi or someone speaking Hindi, but someone speaking the language of the gun. When someone's trying to speak the language of the heart, there cannot be dialogue. The gun has to be put down for there to be dialogue. And when you see the farmer protests again today, water cannons, tear gas, metal
Yeah.
rods, when you walk in with that, you can't have dialogue with farmers who actually didn't want to attack you in the first place, and they still haven't. But the face of the system is always, almost always, that of a violent weapon, and you cannot talk to that beyond a point. That weapon has to be shed. Faces have to emerge for that dialogue to happen. And somewhere the book is trying to entreaty, is trying to make a case for that. But how possible is it until that effort is taken from both sides, not just one side?
Devashish, I just wonder, what does it do to you personally? When you see all these beautiful, proud people, as you said, you see their souls being crushed, and you see so much of oppression. I mean, we see it too, but you've undertaken this journey and you've, chronicled it. What does it do to you as a person?
I had behavioral issues around the time I was working on this material. I've had physiological issues. Around the time I was making Ajji, I contracted prostate cancer, and I didn't realize then why these things were happening. But when you're experiencing this, and I'm not as strong as a Medha Patkar. I don't have those qualities to shield
Yeah.
myself, to keep myself disaffected, to carry on the fight, because I'm always trying to take that emotion and create something of it. So when that emotion is then channeling through me, it is leaving something in its wake. So I've had to grapple with my own, demons that sort of got created when I see what I see, or when I interact with the people I do. And hopefully I try and manifest all of that into my stories so that they don't stay within me entirely, but of course they don't entirely go away either. So I have a life of stories inside me that have to do with all of this material. So a lot of my peers, they ask me, don't you want to make a happy story, don't you want to tell a love story? And I said, my biggest tragedy is that I have love stories inside me, I have mainstream ideas, I have happy stories. I don't have the opportunity to say them because there's so much else. I finish with the Adivasi struggle, and there's the Dalit who needs representation. You finish with that, and then there is patriarchy. You finish with that, and then there is something else. This country is just tearing at its seams with how horrific we are in the way we treat our own countrymen.
And I mean, I come from a state which has become a complete it's an open mental asylum. Kashmir, I think, is the most paranoid state in this country because it's seen this now for over 25 years. They've
Yeah.
lived with this surveillance state. But Devashish, also the whole idea of nature feeling us, when you talk about the trees and the grass, they feel for us, they soak it all in. When the Adivasis are talking about this strange dew that has come, and they talk about nature feeling our pain. How much of that do you think is happening around us? When we look at the raging environmental crisis, is that nature's way of feeding off our toxicity in a way?
How can nature escape that if we are such an intrinsic part of nature? Say till about 1,000 years or 2,000 years back, we were not the most proliferating species on this planet. So there were other species, maybe there were more rats than human beings 2,000 years ago. So nature still had some chance at staying balanced. But now there's so many of us, and we also emerged from nature. So when we are going to go around destroying what we ourselves are a part of, will there not be backlash? And I think it's getting exponentially exacerbated. I think what we are thinking, global warming might destroy us by 2055. It might happen by 2028 because it's just exponentially getting worse. We are proliferating like a virus. Maybe COVID is one way of nature trying to find a little balance. I'm surprised COVID actually, we had it so light. I thought we'd have it much worse.
Yeah, and I don't think it's changed us too much fundamentally, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The other opposition I see so starkly in the novel Devashish is between Lakshmi and Hemla. It's not just the ideology of the gun versus education, but it's also the idea of giving into your anger. And I think that again is one of the greatest tragedies of our time. We've given in to our anger, we've given in to our rage. And Hemla is still someone who tries not to do that. And Lakshmi is, of course, too far gone on that path. Again, this is such a fundamental contrast.
Yes, and unfortunately, when I started writing Oonga years ago, I wanted to give Hemla some sort of a culmination in hope because I believe in her stance. But as the story progressed, more and more it felt to me that Lakshmi is right and Hemla is being foolish. And somewhere by the end, I couldn't control it. It just went out of my
Right.
control, and Lakshmi survives, and Hemla pays the price for believing.
That's really tragic, but unfortunately, it's the truth.
Yes, I don't know if given the current climate,
More,
uh,
more than ever.
pun on the word climate, given the current climate, I think across the world, I don't know how we can escape this tragedy unless we all start thinking, positively all at once and believe in the right things all at once. It can't happen piecemeal anymore.
The other thing again, Devashish, there's so many things to discuss in your novel. I mean, we can go on and on, but the other very interesting thing is the reclaiming of Ram by Oonga. I found that lovely because here you have Ram who has been appropriated as a symbol by a very toxic movement, and here you have this little boy sort of appropriating Ram in the purest way possible and in the sweetest way possible. This really is something quite remarkable, and I think this is something again that you must talk about. Talk a bit about this Oonga believing that this little boy believing that he's Ram and believing that he can vanquish Ravan.
So now, at the expense of probably calling a fatwa upon my head by the very, very uh, frightening and right. So 6 December 1992, I'll just take a minute to trace this back to an experience, a very personal experience. 6 December 1992, in a little mohalla in Calcutta, I was 13, 12 or 13, and we were one of three Hindu families in an predominantly Bangladeshi Muslim slum. And we suddenly, the news of a mandir, of a masjid being demolished reaches this mohalla, and we were attacked that night. My mother was almost raped, and that never left me. I didn't feel anger for whoever was attacking us as much as I felt confusion. I didn't know why that happened. The next morning, we were almost back to normal because I had to go buy eggs from a shop in the slum. I had to, navigate those same gullies that I was navigating every day growing up in that mohalla. So that stayed with me. And somewhere, every time someone says that there is a bhumi where Ram was born, I have a physical response to that, because you can't literalize a, a metaphor. Ram is a metaphor for, certain values. All the characters of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata stand for certain values. Storytelling back then and even today is literally about dispensing values to the people you're telling those stories to through the characters that you populate those stories with. So Oonga for me is my Ramayana, is my Mahabharata, is my modern mythology through which I'm trying to impart certain values. So for me to put forth that idea that Ram was represented certain ideals and was not real was the most important thing for me in this story, because it sort of achieves many things at many levels. It achieves that the idea that he goes beyond religion. So Ram is not just a Hindu metaphor anymore. Ram could be an Adivasi. He could be that Adivasi who stood up for his jungle and didn't want his jungle
Yeah.
destroyed by industry. And when little Oonga, a 11-year-old, a 10, 11-year-old boy will actually arrive at the heart of that metaphor much quicker than an adult, because he doesn't have those trappings and those conditionings that adults do. So he finds that heart of Rama being an Adivasi like him much quicker. He arrives at the metaphor, and therefore, when he understands at a very subconscious level that this is a metaphor, he says, so I can be Ram too, because Ram is a metaphor. What's stopping me from being Ram? And I can replicate those values and those ideals where I come from. So I want to send out this messaging, because the right wing has appropriated from me the things that I took away from the Ramayana. So this is me trying to take it back.
And you do it really well, Devashish, I must say. Devashish, we have some questions, so I'll just read them out. One is from Priya. She says the use of language in dialogue is brilliant. It gives us a sense of class, attitude, and innocence. How did you go about getting the different voices?
So, of course, in the film, all those years back, my biggest struggle was that working in the Bombay industry. It goes without saying that you would make a Hindi film if you'd like to raise finance to tell your story. But here was a story that at its core had the conflict of language. So the film itself was in more than one language. It was in Odia and Hindi predominantly, and a smattering of one or two other languages. So when I arrived at the book, and therefore it was really hard to raise money for, really hard to make, and of course it never released because nobody knew whether they were releasing a regional film or they were releasing a Hindi film. Should it be released in Odisha first? Should it be released in Bombay first? Nobody knew, so therefore it never released. But when I got to the book, there is an inherent irony actually to take two steps back, an inherent irony in the fact that I'm talking about the conflict of language. I'm trying to represent a Hindi, Kuvi, and Odia and Telugu, plus one or two other maybe dialects, and I'm writing the whole thing in English. So I'm not blind to the fact that there is an irony to not being able to actually make you feel that conflict of language and just stating it. So I said, how do we make the reader feel that? So that's where Tulika, the publishers, they sort of helped me arrive at that. We use different fonts in the book for each of those languages, so that hopefully, as you're reading it, first it disturbs you as a reader, but hopefully 20, 30, 50 pages in, you start feeling that conflict because people are speaking different languages. They're not understanding each other.
And I just want to add here, some of the descriptions are so amazing. I just want to read a couple of them for people who've not read the book, and they really must. The red flags that flutter in chorus like a silent anthem of protest. I love that imagery. The prayer from her lips that goes to the earth, that travels to Oonga's angry feet, and then you say tup 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 tup. Even the use of that sound. And when you talk about even the trees standing alone and afraid, even their roots don't touch one another anymore. These are such powerful words, and they bring you right there. They take you right there to the site. So again, many congratulations. Some more questions, Keshava's. You've gone through a lot, and you're my inspiration. I wanted to know what keeps you going, Devashish. Yeah, I'd like to know too.
The one thing that also breaks me is the one thing that keeps me going. There is an unending abyss of rage. I try not showing it half the time, and I'm constantly grappling with it, trying to subdue it, trying to therapeutize it. But when I sit down to tell a story, I dip into that rage. Without that rage, I don't know how to tell stories. So it's rage all the way. I would rather it come into my stories than manifest in me picking up the gun.
And becoming a serial killer or a mass killer, really. Sometimes, like Lakshmi showed, violence is the only option for her.
Yeah.
Again, a very interesting question. Priya Krishnan asks, how did the myth of Ramayana come into play? Did it spark the narrative, or did you realize well into the narrative how the myth becomes relevant to a contemporary telling?
So, like I said, I've lived with this very conflicting relationship with mm, Hindu mythology for a large part of my life. But this particular story, Oonga, came from a little episode that I was, part of when I was traveling South Orissa. A lady there called Sharanya Nayak, who heads Action Aid, she had taken a bunch of Adivasis to go watch Avatar when it released in 2009. And she told me about how when the Adivasis, they didn't understand the language. But what they were seeing on screen was like, this is our story. And they were crying and cheering and jumping out of the seats because they say someone finally put our story on screen. But when that film ended, it ended on a happy note. The Navi get their jungle back. And that's when these Adivasis, their heart sank. They're like, but this is not true. So you're telling the city people the wrong, you're giving them the wrong notion. So somewhere this idea stuck with me. So I said, what if I explore that idea of someone going to see Avatar and coming back thinking that, everything's all right and we're going to get our land back and we're not going to be ravaged. But the real world operates in very different ways. So of course, to make that story my own, I dipped into the source material of the Avatar, which was the Ramayana, and sort of explored our own mythology, which Avatar also attempted to do.
Right. Devashish, we're almost at the end of this session. So I really want to ask, what next for you?
Like I was telling Sanjoy earlier on, my stories are
Is
really
it a
hard.
book? Is it a film?
So my stories are really hard to find backing for. So I am trying, I've got like 15, 16 stories that I'm trying to turn into films. But I'm hoping that this novel does well because the films I make get watched by a very niche audience. They almost never make their money back. So it takes me 3, 4 years to set up a film. So somewhere, you're not a storyteller like me is not getting the energy back that I'm putting into the world. So I'm hoping this book finds readers so that if I feel like I've been energized enough, I would actually drop everything and write my next novel, which is ready, but I just have to sit down and write. And it has all the same motifs that Oonga did, only they're a lot more personal. It's about that night on the 6th of December 1992 in that mohalla in Calcutta.
I'd love to read that. Devashish Makhija, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Kaveree. This was just utterly lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Devashish Makhija, Kaveree Bamzai, and of course Nandita Das for that absolutely wonderful telling of the story of Oonga. Sad that the film was never released, but I do hope that this book will get out there to way more many people. We thank our celebration partners, Diageo, and thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Do remember to stay logged on and watch our sessions at the Darbar Hall as well. If you need to buy a book, go to Amazon online. Craft is always available at Fables of the Earth. And of course, as you're aware, we need you to support us at Teamwork Arts, so do contribute. You can also tweet using the hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 and our handles Jaipur LitFest. The festival and all of us are protected by Dettol. Beware COVID-19. Meanwhile, stay safe, stay protected.